Folks, welcome back to So Bad It's Good, presented by Betches Media. Now, you have probably heard me talk to Charlie Webster, who did the podcast Scamanda that is still at the top of the podcasting charts. But the person we really have to thank for blowing Amanda Riley's case wide open is our guest today. Now, she has been a TV producer for the last 30 plus years. She worked at Hard Copy back in the day. She once had a collect call from Charles Manson, for the love of God, but she has worked in so many stories that you guys have followed, from Elizabeth Smart, Michael Jackson, JonBenet Ramsey, and now Amanda Riley.
On ABC's the 30th of January, we start Scamanda, the docuseries. The next day, it will be available on Hulu to stream.
But I am so pleased to talk to Nancy Moscatiello today. Thank you so much for being here, Nancy.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
What has this experience been like for you before we get into the meat of it? Because this is really blown up and it has captured the world's imagination in terms of Amanda Riley and this scam that she was running, where she said she had cancer for many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really well received. I mean, for me, it's been a little different because I'm used to being behind the camera and like doing my thing in the background and telling great stories, hundreds of stories over the years. So, on that, for this aspect, it's a little unsettling for me to be on the other side of it. But, with this case, it kind of, it became, part of the story in a sense with my involvement, not trying to, it's just how it evolved over time. But it's just been a fascinating to watch it grow and be able to finally tell it in two versions now, right? The podcast, which gives you the details and you don't quite just get to see everyone or understand everything completely, to the docuseries where you kind of brings it to life.
I was telling the audience that I was kind of worried at first in potentially kind of losing some of that magic that the podcast had, where you were able to walk through it in your mind. But I have to say, this docuseries, the first episode, it really is this great complimentary piece of work where it is really jaw-dropping to watch Amanda speak, to watch her give testimony at her church. And it's very chilling. And I think it works to great effect. Can you take the audience of what year you got involved in the Amanda Riley case?
So I got involved in 2015. It was a tip that came into me, I think, as everyone that listened to the podcast knows. And they really wanted me to look into it and said, I was actively looking for those type of cases or stories. They're hard to tell. They're hard to tell on a or find one that has a lot of layers to it that you can prove, right? That's the first and foremost in order to put it on air and tell the story. So those are difficult ones. And so it's always been one that I've wanted to tell or tried to find cases. And so I had posted in a group, looking for people to what do you know? What's out there? What are you thinking? Yeah.
And you have this broadcast journalism background, which I think is so important for a case like this, because your background gives this credence. We're not just going off of rumors and speculation. You're actually trying to see what you can prove. And I know a great concern of yours was, what if we're going after this person that we think is potentially faking cancer, and it turns out that they do have cancer? How did that weigh on you through this? Because even in the podcast, you seem like you were wrestling with this because you were looking for that smoking gun potentially.
Yeah, well, when I got contacted, I had a perspective others that saw her blog didn't, right? I had some information that I was able to second source at the time as well. That was clear that, okay, if this is true, and I feel confident that this is true, then this can't be true. And how do I prove that? Or because everything on that blog was so detailed and so in living color, you know what I mean? Like there was photographs and videos and her talking and such a large community around her that's where you have to step back and say, I have to look past what she's saying and what she's doing and what's in the background. What is this gibberish she's putting out? Is it accurate? Is it not? Like you have to kind of look behind. If I'm operating under the eyes that, okay, she's not telling the truth, how do I do that? And it just took time and patience and, looking at all the little details in the background.
And I also want to point out to the audience that hasn't listened to the podcast. I mean, it became personal for you as well, because you've dealt with cancer in your family, and also Amanda and her husband really came after you in such a vicious way where they made your life miserable for a good period of time. I mean, when you're trying to prove something as a reporter and looking at things factual, and they are actively trying to take you down and make it personal, how do you wrestle with those two things?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's not pleasant by any means, but it's also, the more that happen, I start realizing, oh, I'm on to something.
Yeah.
That reaction was so extreme that I knew even more so that I was not only on the right track, that I was accurate, I was correct. So that's you have that confidence, but it's still not fun to go through. It was a very tedious process, and it dealt with at the time. But their reaction being so over the top, and remember that by the time they had sued me, it had been probably about 2 years into an investigation, and actually even a year after federal agents raided their home. So they knew they were in trouble, right? Agents don't come for fun, right? Especially federal agents. I mean, they have to have something extremely solid and accurate.
Yeah, so you were one of the straws that they were grasping at to try to keep the
Well,
big lie going.
Yeah, it worked for a very long time, right? Because even at that point, the community and everyone around them still didn't believe that they could possibly be telling lies. They had the perfect scapegoat, not just for me, but more so Corey's ex-wife, Alita, who, in the docuseries you'll meet and get to understand a bit more of what they went through as a family. That was really that underlying drive for me, because I knew the injustices on her and her family that had also been, running parallel with the faking cancer.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of layers to this, because it wasn't just
I'm shocked it didn't drive you mad at a certain point.
Yeah.
Like, like to keep focused on this one thing that you're like trying to prove, but there are so many different, it's like a peeling layers of an onion here, and you just had to hold tight. And I want to tease to the audience, in the first episode of this docuseries on ABC, we get to actually meet the whistleblower. The whistleblower finally comes forward, the first person that actually tipped you off to looking into Amanda Riley. And I don't want to reveal who that is, because I think, but I was so appreciative of this person coming forward, because it really just, it makes complete sense. When you first went on to Amanda Riley's blog for the first time, do you go by some kind of journalistic instinct, or did you have a gut reaction immediately upon reading those blog entries the first time?
I by the time when I went on, there was 3 years worth of blogs already. So there was a lot of medical information, meaning like, oh, I'm taking this drug and that drug, and that, so that's what I latched onto first, because to me, like, those are facts. Is this a trial? Is this a combination of drugs that would be in this trial? Is where she is having the trial accurate? Are they actually having these trials? So there's that's the when you say, like, the fact checking that I had to do, like, I latch on to anything that I could check that made sense. The whole idea of looking, at the hospital gowns, or in the background of, she's saying she's at one place, but I see signage for somewhere else. That was all icing on the cake, right? That was extra, because the initial stuff was really in her words, and what she claimed to be having happened to her. And in some of it was fairly easy when you go to clinicaltrials.gov and you do that research. It's that information's out there, and not hard to check. And I consulted with some folks that, a good friend of mine that is a patient advocate for cancer patients, who's very familiar with clinical trials and what's available and what was available at the time. And one of the big things that also stood out is she had Stanford University in her backyard, and yet she needed to travel to New York. It just, that didn't make sense to me right off the bat. Going through stuff with my own sister. We lived on the East Coast. My sister was living on the East Coast, and she was treated in New York City. We went for second opinions there. There was I knew the drill, and I knew what was there. And actually what the drug Amanda was actually claiming to take, the immunotherapy, was tested on my sister way back when. So I was very familiar with some of that. And I was like, it's not passing that smell test off the bat. But, again, I was keeping in mind what I was told from my source, and that helped as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling Charlie that, when I was listening to this podcast over a year ago, my mom was going through her cancer battle, which she unfortunately lost, but she was going to the Mayo Clinic in Arizona, and we luckily, they live in Arizona at the time.
Yeah.
And so listening to this and knowing what my mom was going through and all of the different treatments and how, they're not just mailing these drugs to your home so you can inject yourself. Like, there are these little details where you're like, oh my gosh, it's so flagrant at a certain point, to the untrained eye.
You would think,
you
right?
buy into all of it, right?
That's where, when you're not, also, if you're in the community and you know her and you see her at church and she's ill and she's pulling an oxygen tank and all of this is what you see. When you're looking, did they look at the blog? Maybe they didn't need to, because they're, so when she's giving all these details in the blog, it's easy to look back and say, how did no one pick up on this? But it's really not if you're living it, I think.
Well, and also I think that speaks to greater humanity of that we go through life expecting people to not lie to us.
Yeah, especially about something like this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Even the delicacy in which you guys had to treat this, because what if you were wrong? What if she had this cancer? And so I thought, man, you guys were walking this tightrope until the avalanche of information proved that you were on the right track.
And once I felt very strongly, I knew it was gloves off, because to me, it was so disgusting what she was doing and so vile. And not only that, just what she had done to this family up until this point. Because again, the community on a whole, all of that, taking the money and manipulating them like she did is horrible on one level, but then destroying a family is a whole nother level.
Yeah, I mean, there's a personal aspect of this, not just financial, which is what she is serving prison time for. And I believe she was for like $105,000 in terms of wire fraud, right?
Right.
But wasn't there a lot of other money, like cash donations potentially, that wasn't even factored into that $105,000?
Yes, a lot, and other like fundraisers. So there was church fundraisers, not by the church, but people in the church would auction a quilt, or they did a lot of like what do you call it? Cross training. There was a big part of that community at the church. So they raised, I mean, just those two things alone raised about $10,000. And that wasn't part of, the wire fraud. There was numerous things like that went on over the years. And there was a great deal of people that donated directly. I mean, I know I've talked to family members of Amanda's since, and close family members donated on a weekly basis. You send a check. So, it was a lot of money.
What was the most jaw-dropping revelation or piece of this story that you found out that kind of just dropped your jaw? Like, was there one thing that stuck out where you're like, I haven't seen this in my day?
Yeah, a lot of this case. Again, the idea that this cancer diagnosis was used in the court system, like not just my case, that was one thing. That child custody case, the bankruptcy case, to me, they took it that far. She took it where she's under oath and she's laying it out there, so to me, I think that's something I was shocked by, that it wasn't just kept at a distance from that. I mean, she broke the law on so many levels at that point,
Yeah.
I think that was kind of jaw-dropping to me.
I was so surprised that, this was fully going on and people were, kind of onto her. But at the same time, then she gets a job as a principal at a school district.
Well, they weren't onto her. I mean, when she became principal, that community, the whole community still believed wholeheartedly that she was ill. At that point, I was the bad person. The ex-wife was the bad. There was a narrative put out there that, I think is could be believable. This horrible ex-wife that, And she has this friend then pretending to be this reporter. Like they bought that hook, line, and sinker, and I understand that. And so, I wasn't putting myself out there at all at that point because I knew to combat that was just not necessary. Like I at that point, I knew there was a federal investigation. I knew that they had raided the home. I knew the family knew about me through a few emails. And at that point, I just sat back and waited really because they needed to twist in the wind and keep doing what they were doing. And it was very hard to sit back and watch that, to knowingly watch her continue it and knowing that it's going to eventually catch her. But I had to wait. And because I didn't know where they were at past the raiding of the home, I would keep in touch here and there with the federal investigator, but they really couldn't tell me anything. So I just kind of had to wait. And other victims folks I was able to talk to that said, okay, wait a minute, this is making sense. And they were actually very helpful to the federal investigation. They would keep in touch as well, as knowing that they may have to testify someday and that type of thing. So, And by the time she became principal, that was, again, extremely alarming to me. And at that point, I started reaching out. At that, I knew there was,
because people were giving her money at that school as well. Like it was the same bit. Like they packed up, moved to another location and started doing the same exact thing. And it's like a sequel to a movie, you're like, wow, they're just going kind of bigger and bolder with this, which is so fascinating to watch. And speaking to Charlie,
you would think that at that point, she knows there's feds on her trail. She knows about me. She moves, about a half hour away, gets a job, somehow becomes principal. And instead of staying in remission, because she was in remission at that point, as soon as that community started raising money for someone else that really needed it, that's when, it's back. Oh my God, I need to tell you something.
Oh my gosh, I totally blanked on that part of the podcast when they go to this school and an actual, I believe, teacher has cancer or as well.
Yeah, teacher's aide.
She passed away, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then Amanda starts like asking for money or getting money as well instead of actually
taking half.
Oh my gosh, I remember how much that enraged me. Yes.
And me too. So just say at that point, I was like,
you're bringing up the emotions again for me.
Yeah. I just started calling. I just like, you know what? What's going to happen is they're going to say, I want them to know, like they didn't even know that this other stuff had happened, that there was this investigation, because then again, it's a new community. It's a new church. It's all new audience for her.
Wow. Yeah. I spoke to Charlie earlier and, obviously she has been in contact with Amanda Riley. What is the last contact you've had with Amanda Riley? I can't imagine that's something you're looking to do, but have you had any contact with Amanda?
Yeah, the last contact that I had, well, there's two things. I during my court case, because we were there together, she would make small talk here and there between, taking the stand and whatnot, and which I found really strange. And so that was my interaction with her. And then there were Zoom hearings up until she had a change of plea. So I would participate in those, but not interact with her. And then the change of plea hearing I went to in person while she was there. There was just a couple of us there, and then the sentencing.
Okay.
So I wasn't interacting with her, but those were the last I would see her in person. And I placed phone calls at one point requesting, to speak with her very early on when I knew that she was under investigation, and I never spoke to her, left messages, and then an attorney at the time got back to me. So that was just like brief, normal journalistic approach of, hey, I'm investigating this. Would you talk?
When does she get out of prison?
I believe now it's like February or January of 2026.
2026. Charlie, does keep in contact with Amanda. And I thought, what I loved about the podcast and the docuseries so far is that I think you guys kind of perfectly complement each other. I mean, I think there's a great deal of empathy that Charlie tells this story with, where you are, what we can prove. These are the facts. Kind of not unemotional, because I know you do have emotions, but you come at it from a different angle. Do you sometimes worry about Charlie keeping in touch with Amanda? Because I was initially like, oh my God, is she scamming you? Like, and I mean, I'm kind of being facetious,
Right,
but
right.
there is that danger because she's so dang good at personal communication.
Yeah, no, I'm not worried for Charlie. She's a journalist. She's going to approach it the proper way and keep all of the things in mind that she's learned over since, I came with her to do the podcast. She's learned a lot. She's talked to different people, but, she is manipulative and she is a liar, and it is continuing behind bars. And as much as she may say she has remorse, she has this, okay, that's great. I will believe it when there's actions, so when
Yeah.
she's out and she can go about her life and in a positive and somehow take the action and not try and do this again and not do because she did it
But
in Texas.
how hard is that to, like, it's almost like a drug, is that if you're addicted to this kind of
Yeah.
attention, addicted and you're good at it, that's really hard to not then keep returning to that again and again. So I think a lot of us are fascinated when she is released, what her next steps would be. But was it interesting for you to have her participate in a very small way in this docuseries?
Meaning Amanda?
Amanda, yeah.
Or
Amanda.
yeah, I mean, I think with any story in any case that I work on, you want to hear both sides, and I think there is a fascination with, why did you do this, and the how. I think I've unraveled the how, which I think we explained well, and then in the docuseries explained it too, and you can physically see it more so in the
Yeah.
docuseries, which is cool. So the why.
But what is the why? What is the why? That's what I keep going back
I mean, I
to.
think there's something to be said. There's this combination, right, of this need for validation or attention from a young age, and that's all fine and great. But I think someone knows what's right and wrong, and pretending to have cancer and taking tens of thousands of dollars from people, I think most people know that is wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't,
Yeah.
so I absolutely, it makes me extremely upset what she did again to Alita and to Jessa. So it's
And Jessa, you guys, is
they
the daughter, is Alita's daughter, and she was like the
yeah,
stepmom to Alita, which
yeah,
you
the
see that
lies that
story.
were told on many levels, resulted in someone not having access to their child for 18 months, and that's there is no forgiveness for that.
Because you can't get that time back ever. And I
No,
was also
ever.
thinking about the churchgoers. The religious backdrop of this story is also fascinating, because
Yeah,
you're already believing in God. You're already believing in this thing.
yeah,
And she's up there giving her testimony saying, don't turn your back on God. The miracle could be right there for you then. And this is an example of that God exists, that God is real. And then for this to be proven to
yeah.
be a lie,
Yeah, their
I would
faith was
imagine.
put through it.
Exactly.
She that, again, this is the manipulation, right? Listen to what I'm saying. This miracle, it's all because of your prayers and all because of your help. And again, and with Amanda, and then for $1,300, I can now get this drug. So it's one, it was always this combination. And
Yeah.
that's where I differ with a lot of it, because I think, it's one thing to manipulate for attention, but the ask was always there.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to be part of a miracle? Who doesn't want to be
Yeah,
part of, like, helping somebody?
yeah, of
Um,
course. And that
is it
church
true you're
community was wonderful to them, beyond what they went to. I mean, every holiday, every Christmas, you name it, they stepped up for this family. And again, that's not even part of what she was charged for.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, the
not
first
wire fraud.
episode,
That's the
the first episode, you highlight her, stepping on stage and the dollar donations.
Mhm.
They're throwing money at her feet, and it was like everybody just how amazing this was. And you really, the docuseries really paints that picture in the
Yeah.
first episode, and you kind of see what a vacuum these people were living in terms of Amanda and her illness. Um,
And it did a
I
great job of showing the enormity of it, right? This is a stage, the lights, the smoke machine, like things that you heard
Yes.
described, like and the showing all of that, I think, is really like, you get that feeling like, oh, this is why it was so believable.
Yeah.
Who would go on stage and allow this to happen?
I mean, is it true that one of your first interviews was O.J. Simpson?
Yes. Well, we got the first interview with O.J. Simpson. Yes. Right.
Was
after.
that for hard copy back in the day?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I just think like you've seen so many of these true crime and these stories that have kind of captured our imaginations. And I was just wondering, when you kind of relate it to these stories that you've worked on over the years, what are the similarities that Scamanda and Amanda Riley's story shares with people like O.J. Simpson, John Benet Ramsey, these cases that you've worked on in your
Yeah.
career?
I think with, it's one thing I found is it's not a murder. It's not a very dark, heavy story on the surface. You think, oh, it's a scammer, and it seems kind of run of the mill at first, but when you start looking at the depth that she did it, the documentation that she had, that drive that she had to have cancer and to portray that, is what was so unique. And I knew that it was different. It was different, and it was documented. And a murder case, and those, as big as they are, it's because sometimes there's a celebrity involved, or there's the, oh my God, I can't believe, OJ could have or could not have done this. It's like, this was, a for all intents and purposes, a normal run of the mill family that everyone could relate to, because everyone knows someone that's, struggled or fought cancer. And to have that turned on its head, I think, is what shocks everyone, right?
Yeah.
And to see it play out, if she didn't document everything with photos and pictures and go on stage, like, it wouldn't have that same feeling.
I mean, she made
Like,
her
I
own
knew-
documentary. She made it.
Yeah.
She has so much information out there with which to pull from. I mean, it's
Mhm.
got to be like a dream for certain people that tell these stories, even though it's a nightmare for all the people involved in
Yes.
retrospect.
Yeah.
We're having kind of a little moment with the Menendez brothers right now in terms of like their, potentially their case is going to be up for review. And I want to say this docuseries thus far has done a really great job in highlighting the victims, not just like the cause. Like, we're not making, I don't feel like Amanda Riley's being made into this cause celeb or anything like that. You guys are
Right.
highlighting the victim stories, which is so important to not forget in these scenarios, because we get caught up and we want to make everybody a celebrity these days. Was that
Yeah.
a very important thing for you in doing the docuseries?
Yeah, 100%. Because I heard people say, like, oh, she's like the Anna Delvey of cancer. I'm like, no.
And making her a celebrity.
Yeah, no, yeah. The victims in a story like this are extremely important, and have always been important for stories that I tell, because, that's how either, a lot of people, when they're victims and they choose to participate in a podcast or in a docuseries, they have reasons. It helps them in some manner. They feel like it helps, A, feel like they've gotten justice, and B, that they get some closure. And I hear that a lot. And for this story in particular, that was up to them to participate or not, or to be involved, and how they felt about it, because it is important. Like, the betrayal that they felt, it could have been they gave $1, they gave, $10,000. It's still the betrayal, and that pain, and that trust was so broken over time. I mean, these people were taken on such a journey and a ride with them, and they thought this woman was dying, and they were so concerned and so worried, and to the point of giving financial help. So yeah.
As we wind down, I did want to say, like, when you're researching Amanda and digging into her past, I mean, was there a lot of stories that you came upon that, like, potentially little white lies? I read that there was a broken leg in college that she potentially lied about. Did you find a lot of things of her doing this throughout her life up to this point?
Yes, yeah, we absolutely. Again, once we started doing the podcast and talking to different folks from different stages of her life, we've learned things, additional things. And in the docu-series, we explore even younger than that with friends, and so that's fascinating to me as well. So I do think there was, a tendency for something. What it grew into, I don't think anybody could have predicted that.
Yeah, I've only seen the first episode, and this first episode, man, it left me wanting to see the rest of them immediately, just like the podcast did, because I discovered the podcast after it had already been out. So I binged that entire thing. So like I said to you guys, this is the perfect complement piece of work to that podcast. Even if you know the story, it takes you deeper in. Were there things that
Deeper
you
in, and it
learned?
brings life, right? You get to
Yes,
see what, when all the descriptions of it's hard to imagine how, the people in the community, let's say, fell for it. It's not fell for it, but like how they were drawn in and why they believed what they were seeing. And so to see that brought to life, to see the pictures, the IVs, the head bandage, like you're going to see all that. Like
I
I
know.
think
I didn't
it's
go
important.
digging when I listened to it. I was like, you know what? I don't need to go digging. I'll kind of have my imagination. And I will say, seeing some of this stuff, seeing the fight song Rachel Platten
Yeah.
video that everybody made, there are so many where I was just with my jaw dropped watching this. And I mean that as a compliment, even though this is a horrific story. Also, just finally, to Corey, the husband, why was he? I mean, do we delve into what he knew and when? Because I just can't imagine she did this in some sort of bubble without potential help. And I think I was so, Corey just, I really suspect him of a lot of things.
Special Agent Lee, Federal Agent Lee, is participated in the docuseries, so she explains that a bit more. The how and the why and how they had to handle the case. And just for me, for my own being, I going to court. Corey testified in my court case, and he made it very clear, swearing under oath, that he was at every chemotherapy appointment for 5 years. So do with that what you will.
Yeah, I mean, if you A plus, okay. And then when you get into this line of work that you've been doing for 3+ decades, why did you get into this line of work to begin with? This is such intense work that you do. What was the initial impetus for you to do this as your career?
I started with working in my internships in local news in New York and stuff, and I just grew with this fascination of like, wow, you can tell stories, you can get to the meat of the truth behind something, and I thought that was fascinating. And when I moved out here to Los Angeles and started working at Hard Copy, I was on the news desk as a desk assistant, and everything passed through the news desk. And back then it was a really so you spoke about Menendez. So when I joined Hard Copy, the murders had happened, but they were in between the first trial and the second trial. So I got to work on that as well. And I just remember just being fascinated by all these cases and like, wow, like you always want to kind of understand the why or the truth behind it, or you want to be able to, get to the meat of it, or be able to give someone a platform to talk about what they went through. I always found that fascinating. And sometimes you can do a more in-depth job than other times. It just depends on where, what kind of story you're working on. And I think that's what's really fascinating about a podcast, because it's the first time I done something like that. When working on this, I was like, oh yeah, okay, let's do a podcast, because you can tell so much more of the story, right? And the same with a docuseries. It's like, wow, there's time to really, and that wasn't really happening back at, when I started out. It was more like the TV movie was a big thing. So
Yeah, yes.
And that's fun, and that's something. But like, I find that docuseries such a great format to be able to tell stories. And I've seen so many stories I've worked on over the years become docuseries on. I mean, I say that like the 90s are back, right? In my heyday,
Right.
working at those early days, all those stories are coming back again. So, or being
Did it
told,
give you?
because
Well, I mean, did it give you the bug? Like, I mean, like in terms of like, wow, I need to do another podcast, another docuseries. There's all of these stories that I focused on in my career. Like, do you have like a Rolodex in your head of of stories that you want to tell
yeah.
from this format now?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Again, a lot of them have been told. The ones in the 90s, I feel like, have been told. Oh,
But they haven't
they're
been
kind of
told by
having their
you. They haven't been told
no,
by
not
you
by me.
though.
I know. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, it's that a lot of the colleagues I work with now, I've worked with on and off since the Hard Copy days. They're some of my closest friends, and they are on a ton of different shows, and we collaborate a lot. And we all talk about that. No one's ever done the story about us folks telling those stories?
HBO Max series. I can already see a Sunday night prestige series about the people covering these cases of the 90s. Like,
Well,
that writes itself.
yeah, I mean, you know, some of the stories we've told and worked on, you know, I had I did the first interview with Jill Shively, who was very integral in supposedly in the O.J. Simpson trial, and that changed California law at the time, you know, and so, you know, there's things that have happened over the years that have put things into motion, to, you know, to be able to tell stories in a better way or in a more uh, a positive way, you know. So there's different things that have happened over the years that it'd be fascinating to talk about that.
Yeah, we're so detail driven as a society now, which can be really good, and that's why these things are so great when you can, like you said, really dive into the details with docuseries and podcasts. And finally, just because this little tidbit I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, you're working on a news desk at the beginning of your career, and you have a collect call from Charles Manson on the prison hotline. What is the story there? I know that's not Scamanda, but I have you here, and I've got to ask.
Yeah. So at the time, we were okay. So my boss, the executive producer at the time, Linda Bell, icon in the news industry. Linda had interviewed Charles Manson before for stuff she had worked on over the years, and another on-air person for us was Doug Bruckner, who was a big name back then that covered the Menendez trial and every trial for us at Hard Copy. We had reached out to the prison to via then you had to write a letter to ask him to call and talk about, actually it was, I want to say pop culture, but he was had called in to talk about the different cases that were ongoing and how they were being treated as they were treated, you know, because it was a time where things were like, people were crazed for this, and tabloid TV was, and that day felt more over the top. I think it feels very normal now. It's very similar to what we see everywhere now, right? So, but tabloid was asking the questions that maybe others didn't. And if some didn't like that, some did. And he was calling to weigh in on that at the time, which was, you get this collect call. And back then you'd get the collect call and it would say you were receiving a collect call from the, you know, whatever penitentiary. And then there's a pause. And then it's their voice that says, you know, Chuck Manson. And then
oh my God.
I was a kid. I was quite very new to this. And I just remember going, oh, this can't be, no way, you know. And then I said, I remember covering hello, you know, and covering the phone and saying, let me see if she's here, and going, could this be? And they were like, yes, that's it.
Oh my gosh, that's so bizarre. And what you have to deal with throughout your career. You guys, we just the tip of the iceberg, but this is great because you get to watch the docuseries. And if you haven't, you get to listen to the podcast and you get to fill in all of the blanks. Like you could talk to Nancy for hours because she is a treasure trove of experience and information.
We get to see all of this at work in a glorious fashion in the new docuseries Scamanda, premiering on January 30th on ABC.
The next day, you're going to stream that on Hulu, and then you're going to do that week after week until this story wraps up. Are you really proud of this whole docuseries and podcast?
Oh yeah, no, very proud of it. I'm very grateful that the story got to be told, and it's a great way to have it documented in history, because if she gets at it again and someone goes, oh, who's this woman Amanda, you know, boom boom boom, oh wait a minute.
Yeah, there's a lot when they do that Google search. There's gonna be a big Google search.
I think everyone does that now. This is a very common thing to do, right? So hopefully this will open people's eyes before it could ever be a problem again.
Well, thank you for your work. I hope I get the opportunity to speak to you again someday. Nancy Moscatiello, go check out Scamanda right now, you guys. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you so much.